artists, it's Dalene McIntosh here, Epic Art Academy, doing the Epic Journey as usual. I'm a little bit high on the camera, the top of my head is chopping off. Forgive me for that. We're in front of the whiteboard today because today we're going to be discussing a little bit of a sort of a science lesson, let's put it that way. You've heard me say before, I always refer to the fact that you have got to employ good practices, technical practices in your art. One of those things that I have discussed in previous videos was not using soap and water as a solvent. You know, a lot of artists don't want to use tubes, so they figure soap and water washes the oil out of their brushes, so they think it's not a bad idea to wash your brushes in soap and oil, dip them back into your paint and keep working. And we're going to talk about what the problems are that can achieve, what it can do to your painting, and I'm going to go a little bit into the science of it. I'll try not to get too technical. I'll go a little bit into the science of it, just so that, you know, for me to just tell you don't do it because it's not good for your painting, it's going to cause cracking or whatever, is not going to be quite as credible as for me actually to explain to you why and what is actually happening to your paints when you're using a soap and water type of solvent. It has become more and more prevalent that because artists don't want to use tubes, that they think that using something soapy might do the trick. And on the face of it, you don't see what's happening. All you can see is that the oil has been washed off your brushes and you don't really realize what it's doing to your painting surface. So, to be able to understand exactly what's going on here, I'm going to start right in the beginning. You know, for the hardened artists amongst us and the anti-science people amongst us, this video might get a little bit technical, so just bear with me. Just wait until the end and you'll see how this all fits together. So what I'm going to just talk about first is what is the difference between dissolving something and destroying something. Now, you will know that when you dissolve, let's say, salt into a glass of water, what's going to happen is you'll have your glass of water and your pile of salt. Your salt is made up of lots and lots and lots of little grains of salt, and your water is made up of lots and lots and lots of little molecules of water floating around. Now, each molecule of water is made up of H2O, as you know, so we've got 2 oxygen molecules and a hydrogen molecule, and one or other, I don't remember which one of them is positive and one side is negative in terms of its electrical charge, and obviously minute little electrical charges, and each molecule of water is held together, they're held to one another. You know, each molecule of water is attached to the other. So if you pour your glass of water out, so it's all going to come, it's not going to drop out one molecule at a time because they're all kind of attached to each other. And that's what we call surface tension. You'll notice on the top of your glass, if you poured a glass of water right to the brim, you'll see the glass does that. You know, if that's your glass, you'll see the water kind of sits on top of the glass. It doesn't immediately spill over. That's because of surface tension, because each molecule is holding hands with the molecule next to it. And that is a little electrical or magnetic charge, minute little magnetic charge that is pulling those molecules together. So they have this bond so that they all kind of fit together. Now, when you add a teaspoon of salt to the water, and you mix it around with a bit of it. If you just added the salt to the water, you'll see the salt will mostly fall to the bottom of the glass of water. But if you mix it around a little bit, what's going to happen is it's going to disperse the salt into the water. And because salt and water, water is a diluent of salt, or salt dissolves in water, what's going to happen is that the salt, the grains of salt, are going to then sit between. Now salt is sodium, of course, so whatever the periodic table symbol is for that, I don't know, but these little bonds are going to sit between nothing happens to the molecule of water and nothing happens to the molecule of salt. The molecules of salt just split apart and they start sitting between. So you'll have a water molecule next to a salt molecule and a water molecule next to a salt molecule. So they just interdisperse with one another. Now that is when something is dissolved. Now, as you know, water and oil don't mix, so oil is not going to dissolve in water in the same way that salt dissolves in water. And the reason for that is because a water molecule has a magnetic charge and an oil molecule does not. so they push apart from one another. You know, if you put two magnets together, you push one side of the magnets together, they stick, other side of the magnets, you turn them around, put them together, they repel one another. Well, oil and water repel one another because they are not the same charge. So what's going to happen, because an oil molecule is neutral, in other words, it has neither a positive nor a negative charge, and water has both it's got a positive charge on the one side and a negative charge on the other side. So they are going to repel one another, so they will not mix. Okay. Now, in the case of putting soap into water, now you know if you wash the dishes, you've got dishes that have got a bit of a greasy substance in them from the dinner that you've eaten, and you're going to fill your sink with water, and you're going to put a bit of soap into it, and then you put your plate into the water and you wash it, and you can't feel the oil in the water, it dissolves into the water. Now, why is it that in soapy water oil dissolves, but in plain water oil does not dissolve? The reason for that is because soap contains a substance or a molecule called a surfactant. Now, a surfactant is effectively a soap molecule. It's a long, thin molecule. On the one side, it's got a positive charge, and on the other side, it's neutral. Can you see where we're going with this? Okay. It's actually a positive and a negative charge, and the other side is neutral. So what happens? Two same charges are going to stick together. So this will grab hold of that water molecule that is positive and negative, and the water molecule and the surfactant form a bond because they stick together like two little minute magnets. The other side of the molecule grabs hold of the oil because the oil molecule has also got a neutral charge. So in the same token, these two little molecules are going to grab hold of one another. So what's going to happen is the surfactant is going to help break the water molecules holding hands with one another. It's going to help break them and help them to hold hands with an oil molecule. Once you've got all your oil molecules dissolved into your water, you can now take the plug out, wash all the water away, and the water takes all the oil away with them. The oil molecule itself does not get destroyed. It stays an oil molecule, it's just that it is now bonded to a water molecule because the surfactant, it's such a long word, basically the soap molecule, grabs hold of each one, so when you wash the one away, the other one goes with it, and off they go. Now, why can't you do this with your oil painting? Right, so let's put that aside for a minute, and let's talk about what happens when you use your oils correctly. Now, you've also heard me talk before in some of the previous videos that I've done that using a mineral oil is not a good idea in your painting. So we'll touch a little bit on that as well. But you get the two different types of oil. You get your organic oil and you get your mineral oils. Mineral oils come from a petroleum base. They're a distillation, a byproduct of the distillation of petroleum. So they are, it's a hydrocarbon chain. Mineral oils are a hydrocarbon chain, okay? So let's just refer to minerals as hydrogen plus carbon. It's a hydrocarbon chain of oil, as opposed to an organic oil, and there's very many different ones, but there's going to be all sorts of other molecules in there as well. There's going to be hydrogens, there's going to be carbons, there's going to be oxygens, there's going to be alcohol, there's going to be chlorine, there's going to be all sorts of things, okay? It's going to be all sorts of molecules depending on the different types of oils, all right? But basically, your organic oils are still going to be neutral regardless of what they are. Neutral. Regardless of what they are. Mineral oils are also going to be neutral, don't get me wrong. So if we have a look at how an organic oil bonds in terms of your paints. You're going to mix your paint with a little bit of organic oil, and we're talking about things like alkyd medium, safflower oil, walnut oil. These are all plant-based oils. So what will happen is now you're going to have your oil molecule. Now we talk about your wet oil. Your paint is wet. You've mixed it with a bit of oil and you've painted your painting surface, and you've got all these oil molecules sitting next to each other. Now we're looking at it under a microscope, of course. And obviously in there you're going to have your pigment molecules as well. But for the moment we're talking about oil molecules. Now, oil does not dry in the same way that water dries, in other words, in the form of acrylic. Acrylic, you're going to have a water molecule, and we're going to draw it as a three-sided little thingy. just so that you know that's a water molecule. So we're going to have water molecule and pigment, and they're sitting on the surface of your painting. Obviously, there's more to it. There's a couple of layers of it, of course, because your paint's going to be a lot thicker than a single molecule. But now what's going to happen is this is H2O, so you've got hydrogen and 2 oxygens that are making up a water molecule. And this is going to evaporate into the air. So your hydrogens, just under normal circumstances, the bonds with the hydrogen and the oxygen are going to release, and these things are going to float away into the air, and you're going to be left with your pigment and your emulsion molecules in a row and deep, and that is going to be now your dry painting surface. Oil does not dry in the same way. Oil does not have hydrogen and oxygen molecules that are going to release and dissipate into the oxygen. What's going to happen is they are going to draw out of the out of the atmosphere, oxygen molecules. Now, oxygen is O2, so we're going to have a little O2 molecule that's going to come and sit here, and one of the O2s is going to bind, because there's 2 oxygen, it's going to bind with an oil molecule, and on this side, it's going to bind with the other oil molecule, and you're going to end up in a situation where you've got a layer of oxygen molecules holding hands with your little oil molecules, and that's what causes them to dry, because this now becomes a polymer. Okay, so oil reacts with the oxygen in the atmosphere, draws it out of the atmosphere, they form together, bond together to form a chain of oil and oxygen molecules, and that becomes a polymer, and you've now got a dry oil surface. Nothing evaporates from an organic oil, okay? It's pulling it out of the water, releases both the hydrogen and the oxygen molecules and evaporates into the air, as opposed to oxidation, where the oil is going to pull the oxygen molecules out of the air, and they're going to join together, and it hardens. All right. So that's the difference between oxidation and evaporation. Now, how does a surfactant in your oil affect what is going on here? Well, if you think in terms of now your surfactant, and your surfactant is going to be your soap. So if you add sunlight liquid into warm water to wash your brushes, you wash your brushes, or even thin your paint. I've even heard of artists using soapy water to thin their oil paints down. And they don't realize that this is happening, because what's going to happen is your surfactant, I'm just going to call it surf for now, is going to hold on to a water molecule on the one side, because it's positive and negative charge, and they're going to attract positive and negative that side, positive and negative that side, and magnetic attraction is going to cause them to attract to one another. Then you're going to have your oil molecule on that side, and they're both neutral, because the other side of the surfactant is neutral, so the same thing happens. They're going to bond together by magnetic attraction. So now the surface of your painting, looked under a microscope and cross-section, is going to have surfactant oil, surfactant water, surfactant oil, surfactant water, or water, surfactant oil, whichever, but you're going to have a layer of oil and water molecules interdispersed with a surfactant molecule. So now we've got a problem, because that water molecule is going to evaporate. Next to it, we're going to have a water molecule with surfactant and oil, and there we've got water and say oil, and that water molecule is going to evaporate. Alternatively, we're going to have oils here that are attracting oxygen out of the air, and we're going to have oxygen molecules bonding to an oil, but there's not necessarily going to be an oil molecule next to it with which it can bond again. Even if there is, sooner or later you're going to have a surfactant molecule, so you're not going to create long, uninterrupted chains of oil molecules that are bonded together with oxygen. Instead, what you're going to get is you're going to get a surfactant and a surfactant and an oil and an oil and a surfactant and a surfactant, because this is where the water was. In this space here, that's where the water was, but it has now evaporated out of the oil, and you ended up with surfactants and oils. The problem when you've got 2 surfactants next to each other, this is where the water molecule used to be. And it is a positive negative charge, and that is a positive negative charge. And as you know, that the charges in these two, because they're the same or because they're opposite, whichever the case may be, is actually going to force your surfactant molecules to repel from one another in much the same way as if you put the 2 wrong sides of the 2 poles, opposite poles of a magnet together. You can't get them to stick together, because they have this force between them. And the same thing is going to happen now. One side of your surfactant is going to be positive and the other side is going to be negative, or vice versa, and they're going to end up repelling from one another. So I can't remember sometimes, I mean, I'm an artist, I'm not a scientist, I can't remember sometimes if is it two the same poles that put together, or is it two opposite poles that pull together? I think it's the two the same poles that pull together. Anyway, but either way, we're going to end up in a situation where your surfactant is actually going to be with magnetic repulsion, is going to be pushing away from one another. Even if they don't, even if they do attract to one another, you don't have an oil molecule in there. You've just got two surfactant molecules next to each other. On top of that, because your surfactant is made up of various different molecules, the hydrogen molecules and the oxygen molecules that are in your surfactant over time are also going to dissipate into the atmosphere. So what will happen microscopically is that you'll have a little blob of oil, and then you'll have a weak area where there's little or no molecules, and you have a blob of oil and then nothing. And you know, so when you look at the surface of your oil under a microscope, if ever you get an opportunity to do that, you've got weak areas. You've got little blobs of oil stuck together, and you've got weak areas where there's just surfactant and nothing else. And what is going to happen is that oil layer doesn't get a chance to absorb oxygen out of the atmosphere and turn into a polymer, so you don't end up with this lovely strong surface across your painting. Now, why is that a problem? Mainly it's a problem because with these gaps in the surfactants and with the surfactant themselves, you're going to have an exchange of moisture happening. So this is going to let moisture in as well as moisture out. And by moisture, I'm talking about water molecules, okay? Now, if you've got water molecules trapped underneath this layer inside, which is going to happen because remember, this is just one layer of molecules. You've got a whole lot of layers of molecules. Even a millimeter thick layer of paint is going to have a whole bunch of layers of molecules. And down here somewhere you might have, because you had water in your surfactant or in your soap, because you've now washed your brushes and mixed your paint with soap and water, you've got water molecules down here somewhere. And over time, those water molecules are going to start to degrade, and they're going to also start to grow mold. So down here, somewhere in the lower regions of these molecule layers, is going to get a layer of mold growing. Now, mold is going to be a major problem for your painting because you cannot get rid of it, because you've got paint on top of it. You can't get down there to the mold to actually clean it out. And mold starts to appear on your paintings as little white, over time, little sort of cloudy white dots on your painting. And you can't get rid of it. Now, this is different from when we talk about varnishing a painting. Varnishing a painting and getting mold under a layer of varnish is different because you can remove the varnish. And the reason for that is because if you use an organic oil and you've got now this is your microscopic bond, your microscopic layer of polymer, because there's your oxygen and it's linking everything together, and everybody is nice and stable and everybody's holding hands like good friends. This is now a pretty strong membrane effectively over your painting, and below that you're going to have the same thing happening. You know, you've got oxygen and it just keeps going down to the bottom. And that's why this layer, this drying process of oil never really ends, because through the layers this keeps happening. The oxygen molecules keep attaching and detaching, and so it goes. But now, let's just say your oil is dry and you've left your painting for 6 to 12 months for the drying process to really, because this is a very slow process compared to acrylics that evaporate. That's why acrylics dry so much quicker than oils do, because acrylic it works on evaporation, so it works really, really quickly. And of course, the hotter the day is, the more it's going to evaporate, because heat tends to accelerate evaporation. It doesn't work the same way with oxidation, because oxidation is pulling oxygen out of the atmosphere, and that the heat doesn't affect that. It's going to stay relatively consistent throughout the day or throughout the different temperatures, and it's a much slower process. But let's say now you've left your painting for 6 months to a year, and you now varnish your painting, okay? And whatever your varnishes are a different molecular structure to oils, but you're going to end up with a layer of varnish that sits on top of this. Okay, so you've got your oil layers with all your pigments and paint in it, and then you've got this little thin layer on top. They don't form a very strong bond. The molecules in your varnish and the molecules of your oil don't form a particularly strong bond. It just sits on top. And that's a good thing, because what's going to happen is if over time your painting gets dirty or mold does start to grow between these two layers because there was some moisture trapped or whatever the reason may be, you now want to restore that painting. All you need to do is come along with some turpentine, and this dissolves and washes off, because this layer, the varnish layer, will dissolve in turpentine. The oil layer now, because it's a polymer, is not going to dissolve in turpentine. If you notice that you can't wash off dry paint with turpentine, because once it's oxidated, it becomes a polymer, and the polymer won't dissolve in the turpentine. So your layer of varnish that sits on top is now going to be removable with a bit of turpentine. You literally remove it off. It doesn't damage your top layer of oil. You can now clean it and wash it and then just revarnish it, and your surface is unaffected. If, however, you don't have a layer of varnish and you want to restore this painting because over time you've ended up with mold that's happening down here because your paint chemistry wasn't right, you have a problem, because you can't really get the top layer of oil off without damaging your painting, because then you've got to resort to something like thinners that's going to dissolve the oil or dissolve the polymer once it's dry, and then of course you're going to destroy your painting. So it's a very simplified way. We can go a lot more in depth into it, and I really don't want to do that because I really don't want to bore you. But I do tell artists I don't have a problem with you washing your brushes in soap and water, provided you make sure that that soap and water is well out of your paintbrush by the time you start painting again. Well gone. And you want to wash it out with turpentine. If you wash it out with thinners, thinners has a very different effect on the oil molecules than terps does. Terps does not destroy your oil molecule. In other words, terps and oil are going to behave in much the same way as the salt and water. And terps and oil are going to do the same thing. Oil is going to dissolve in terps. So you've got your terps molecule and your oil molecule, and they are still separate molecules. The terps does not destroy the oil molecule. Now, in the case of thinners, it does destroy the oil molecule. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about mineral oil as well, because mineral oil, although it's still an oil, it is a hydrocarbon chain. It is a petroleum-based product. It does not have the same chemical compositions as an organic oil does. So a plant-based oil is going to have a lot more molecules that describe fats than a mineral oil does, because mineral oils are just straight hydrocarbon chains. Let me explain to you what happens in the oxidation process with a mineral oil. With a mineral oil, you're going to have hydrogens and carbons. This is a very basic mineral oil chain that I'm drawing here, but you've got hydrogen, 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 and then you're going to have carbon, 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 and that's kind of loosely what a hydrocarbon chain looks like. Now what happens is, this is an incredibly stable environment, because your hydrogen is a very stable molecule. The hydrogen molecule on its own is not found in nature. Hydrogen in nature is actually two hydrogen molecules together that have stuck together, so it's H2. And what happens with hydrogen is once there's two hydrogen molecules stuck together, it's incredibly stable. And then you attach it to a carbon, and carbon is stable. So you've got this very stable molecule happening. And because it's stable, there's not. What we refer to by stable is that there's no interreaction. There's no chemical reaction that takes place. It doesn't need any oxygen to make it a stable, because molecules are always going to look for a state of stability. So in the case of our alkyd oils or those organic oils that we're using, it's a slightly unstable molecule. So the molecule attracts the oxygen out of the air, which bonds them, and it becomes stable. Mineral oil is already a stable molecule, and that's why it doesn't dry, because it's not going to have a reaction. There's going to be no evaporation taking place, and there's going to be no oxidation taking place. However, under the right circumstances and over a very long period of time, it is possible to get a mineral oil to varnish in much the same way that an organic oil does. But then what's going to happen is you've got to apply a lot of heat to it, so that those hydrogen, because there's two little hydrogen molecules holding hands, remember, you want them to break their bonds, and then they dissipate into the atmosphere. So the carbon chains release the hydrogen molecules out into the atmosphere, and we're left with carbon chains, which then become stable again. However, you need apparently it takes a lot of energy to be able to do this. And of course the best way to get a lot of energy going is heat. So you need to apply a lot of heat to a mineral oil to get those hydrogen molecules to burn off and leave just, but then by then you've burnt your painting. So it's not like you can put your canvas into a kiln and fire it off. You know, when I was doing porcelain painting quite a lot, I used to paint onto ceramic plates. I'll get one for you and I'll show you. That's a ceramic paint that I would apply. It's just a, you know, porcelain or bone china or whatever the case may be, and it's got a layer of glaze over it, and then you paint onto that. Now, when I was doing this kind of painting, I used to use an oil called liquid paraffin. Now, liquid paraffin, much like baby oil or any other kind of mineral oil, is a hydrocarbon chain. But the difference is that this plate, because it's a plate, I could put it into a kiln, and the kiln fired at temperatures of 800 to 1200 degrees Celsius, burnt off the hydrogen, and I was left with carbon chains. And here I've got a, and you know that this plate let's have a look. This was painted in 1999, and there's absolutely no damage to it. It has had stuff put onto it. This is the only way that you're getting the paint off this surface is with a hammer and chisel. It's as simple as that. So it is a really, really strong bond, but it's not going to happen on something that you can't put under high temperature. What will happen under normal circumstances on a normal canvas is that it is going to stay a hydrocarbon chain, because the hydrogen molecules are already so stable they're not going to dissipate. So it will stay a hydrocarbon chain, which means it will forever stay sticky. Now, if you use baby oil with your paint coming out of the tube has already got some kind of organic oil in it. It's usually safflower or linseed oil that your paint is mixed with, and you might think that your paint is drying because what's happening is the oil in the paint is what's going to dry. The baby oil that you've mixed in with your paint is not going to dry. So in the immediate future, you touch your painting and it feels dry, so you think it's dry. But what you don't realize is that the oil molecules, the hydrocarbon chains, are still hydrocarbon chains. They haven't changed anything. It's still baby oil. That is still liquid oil, and that is going to become attractive to dust particles in the air. Your painting is going to get very sticky. If you've ever gone into a fish and chip shop and the walls are sticky and the surface, everything's sticky, because those oils don't dry. They slightly oxidate because that's a heated environment, but they never ever dry, and you're going to end up with really gunky, gooey painting surfaces. So mineral oils, don't go near your painting with mineral oils. Always make sure that it's organic oil. And in the case of good quality oils for art, we're talking about oils that have been well refined to get all the colorants and the yucky molecules out, dirty stuff that we don't want on our painting. So we're looking at, sort of boiled linseed oil and well refined safflower oil and our alkyd resins, things like that, and walnut oil and stand oil, those things that have been tried and tested. Things like sunflower oil for cooking. Yes, it's an organic oil. Olive oil for cooking. Yes, it's an organic oil. And yes, they are probably also going to oxidate over time, and they're going to form a nice polymer layer. But they're so full of colorants and so full of other kinds of impurities that you don't want on your painting surface, because they're going to have all sorts of other reactions depending on the molecules that are in there. But they're coloured. Sunflower oil is very yellow, and olive oil has got this greenish tinge to it. And you don't want those on your paintings, and you don't want the other molecules that are with the oil molecules in those particular oils that are good for eating and they're good for cooking. That's arguable, but they're not good for your painting surface. So that is a little scientific thing. Like I said to you in the beginning of the video, the reason I'm giving you this is not because I want to be all complicated, not because I want to, become a chemist, or even have you become a chemist. We are artists, we are creative, and we want to stay creative, but what we want to do is we want to make sure that we at least obey the chemistry of our paintings, or the chemistry of the materials that we use, so that we don't put our paintings into a position of not being lasting long enough. We want our paintings to have the best quality materials and last under all sorts of conditions for as long as what is possible. So artists, and again, thank you very much for bearing with me for this slightly technical, sort of scientific video, but I really just feel very strongly about making sure that you know why I say the things that I do. There is good, sound, scientific theory behind all of this, and this that I've just been talking to you now, because I've investigated it, obviously I want to know why these things happen the way that they do. And I have just recently, preparing for this video, run all my research past a PhD chemist. He's actually my husband's best friend, and he has a doctorate in chemistry. He works for Sasol Oil, incredibly well-educated man. And after I put all my research together, I sat with him and I went through it all together, and he confirmed all the research that I had done. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me. Stay tuned. Bye.